I am 90 years old, and I spent 44 years running schools in Augusta, Georgia, and I am going to tell you 6 rules about dealing with disrespect that nobody, not your parents, not your therapist, not a single self help book with a sunrise on the cover has ever told you correctly. And I say that with full confidence because I got every one of these rules wrong before I got them right. I had a PhD in education and 44 years of professional authority, and I still spent decades handling disrespect in ways that made it worse, not better. And I am going to tell you exactly how I did that, and exactly what I learned, and exactly why what most people do when they feel disrespected is the single most reliable way to guarantee that it keeps happening. I ran 3 schools. I managed hundreds of adults who did not always want to be managed. I buried my husband Theodore in 2009 after 51 years of marriage. I buried my son Marcus in 2014. He was 57 years old, and he left a space in this family that nothing has filled and nothing will. I lost my dearest colleague Phyllis in 2018. I have been in enough rooms where someone was trying to diminish me that I lost count somewhere around 1985. And in all those rooms, in all those years, I learned 6 things that I wish I had known at 40, at 50, at 60. When you start to become invisible to certain people in ways you did not expect and were not prepared for. I am going to give those 6 things to you now, free of charge, with the full receipts of my own mistakes attached. Let me tell you who I am before you decide whether any of this applies to you. I am not a naturally composed woman. I want to establish that immediately because the composure you may be reading in how I speak right now was earned slowly, expensively, through decades of doing it wrong and watching the consequences and having to go back and repair what my reactions had broken. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, the daughter of a janitor and a laundress, in a time and a place where a Black woman with ambitions had approximately 3 professions available to her, and I chose teaching because my 5th grade teacher, Miss Odessa Franklin, looked at me one morning in October of 1944 and said, "Lorraine, you are going to run something someday." I was 10 years old. I held on to those words for 60 years. I started teaching in 1957. I became a vice principal in 1971 and a principal in 1979. And I want to tell you what that felt like in 1979 in a school district in Georgia, where some of the people I was now supervising had not expected to ever be supervised by someone who looked like me. I learned about disrespect in its most concentrated and specific forms in those first years as principal. I learned what it looks like when it is subtle, when it is dressed up as helpfulness, when it smiles at you and calls you by your first name without permission, when it excludes you from conversations that you should be in, when it speaks over you in meetings and then credits your idea to someone else 5 minutes later. I also learned, and this took longer, what I was doing in response that was making all of it worse. The specific moment that started my real education on this subject was a Thursday afternoon in February of 1983. I was 43 years old, and I had just come out of a district meeting where a colleague named Gerald Patterson had dismissed something I said in front of 12 people with a smile and a wave of his hand, as though I had said something naive that didn't warrant full engagement. And I had sat there and said nothing. I had swallowed it whole and gone back to my notes and moved on. And on the drive home, I was so angry I had to pull the car over on Washington Road and sit for 15 minutes before I could drive safely. I sat there and I asked myself, "Lorraine, why didn't you say something?" And the answer that came back was the beginning of everything I am about to tell you. I didn't say something because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't make things worse. And that specific helplessness is where most people live when it comes to disrespect. Not because they lack dignity, because they lack a framework. And without a framework, the only options available feel like silence or explosion, and neither one of those actually solves the problem. Here is the framework I built over the next 47 years. 6 rules, in the order you need them. Rule 1. Disrespect that is not addressed is disrespect that has been given permission to return. I want to say that again because it is the rule that contradicts everything most people were raised to believe. Most of us were raised to believe that the dignified response to disrespect is to rise above it, to not give it the satisfaction of a reaction, to let it pass and maintain our composure and trust that people of character will eventually recognize the quality of our silence. That is a beautiful philosophy, and it does not work. I know because I practiced it for 20 years. I rose above things. I maintained composure. I let things pass. And Gerald Patterson dismissed me in one meeting in 1983, and again in 1985, and again in 1988, and again in 1991. And every single time I said nothing and composed myself and drove home gripping the steering wheel, I was teaching him and everyone watching that what he did had no consequence. I was not rising above it. I was authorizing it. The moment I understood that was in a meeting in March of 1991, when a younger woman on my staff, new teacher, first year, watching everything, told me later that she had seen Gerald dismiss me and had thought, if even she doesn't respond to it, there must be nothing to do. She had taken my silence as evidence that nothing could be done rather than as dignity. And that broke something open in me that has never closed back up. Silence in the face of disrespect is not dignity. It is donation. You are donating to the person who disrespected you the message that it was acceptable, and they will spend that donation. You do not have to respond with anger. You do not have to make a scene, but you have to respond. The response can be one sentence, delivered calmly, clearly, and without apology. That's not how I'm going to be spoken to. I'd like to finish my thought. Let me correct that. One sentence. Calm, clear, immediate. Then move on. The response is not for them. It is for you and for everyone watching and for the next time, which either happens because you allowed the first time or doesn't happen because you didn't. Rule 2, your reaction is the only part of this you actually control, and most people control at worst precisely when it matters most. I have seen more intelligent, dignified, accomplished people destroy their own position in a disrespect situation by reacting in proportion to how they felt rather than in proportion to what the situation required. I have done it myself. I understand it completely. When someone diminishes you, the emotional response is real and it is not wrong. What is wrong, what costs you, is letting that emotional response set the volume and the content of what you say next. In 1995, at a school board meeting, a board member named Harlan Briggs, a man who had been a thorn in my professional side for 11 years, made a comment about a budget proposal I had submitted that was dismissive in front of a room full of people in a way that was designed to diminish me publicly. And I responded at full volume with everything I had been collecting about Harlan Briggs for 11 years. And I was right about every single thing I said, and I won that exchange in the room. And the next week, two board members who had been on my side quietly started creating distance between themselves and me because my reaction had frightened them. Being right is not enough. Being right loudly in the wrong setting in proportion to 11 years of accumulated grievance rather than to the specific moment in front of you, that is a different thing. I won the battle and I weakened my position, and I have spent 29 years thinking about the difference between those two things. Respond to what happened today, not to everything that led up to today. The response to today should be measured, precise, and proportionate to today. Everything else is for your journal, your therapist, or the drive home, not for the room. Rule 3. Never explain yourself to someone who has already decided what they think of you. This is the rule that took me longest to learn and that I see violated more than any other by people over 60 who are dealing with disrespect from grown children, from younger colleagues, from doctors who speak over them, from anyone who has pre-decided their value. When someone disrespects you, the instinct is to correct the misunderstanding, to explain who you actually are, to provide the evidence that their assessment is wrong. And that instinct is one of the most expensive habits you can have because explanation in response to disrespect does not correct the disrespect, it feeds it. It tells the person that their opinion of you has power over you, that you need them to revise it, that you are applying for their approval. I watched my mother do this her whole life with certain people, explain herself, justify herself, provide credentials for her right to be in rooms she had every right to be in. And every time she explained herself, those people became slightly more certain that they had correctly identified someone who needed to explain herself. Theodore, my husband, said to me once, "Lorraine, you don't explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve the explanation. You just keep moving." He was a quiet man who said very little, and what he said was almost always exactly right. I have been working on following that advice for 35 years. You do not owe an explanation to someone who has decided to disrespect you. You owe yourself a clear, brief response, sometimes not even that, and then you owe yourself the dignity of continuing to be exactly who you are without their endorsement. Rule 4. Distance is not defeat. It is sometimes the most powerful statement available. I spent years confusing proximity with influence. I thought that staying close to people who disrespected me, staying in the room, engaging, demonstrating my value, was how I would eventually change their assessment. What I learned is that strategic distance, the deliberate, visible withdrawal of your time, attention, and energy from someone who repeatedly disrespects you, is often more powerful than any response you could give in the room. There was a woman on my staff in the late 1990s named Patricia Hewitt who made a habit of subtle disrespect, the kind that is hard to pin down, the kind that functions through implication and exclusion and small orchestrated moments of dismissal. I spent 3 years trying to manage my relationship with Patricia by staying engaged, staying generous, continuing to include her. What I eventually understood is that my continued engagement was itself the problem. It told Patricia that her behavior had no cost, that I would keep showing up regardless. The year I stopped going out of my way for Patricia, stopped initiating, stopped including beyond what the job required, stopped being warm beyond what the work demanded, Patricia's behavior changed. Not because she had a revelation, because the dynamic had changed. The attention she had been receiving, even the attention generated by her own bad behavior, was no longer available. People who disrespect you often do so precisely because your continued presence and warmth signal that the disrespect has no cost. Withdrawing those things calmly, without drama, without announcement, changes the calculation. You do not have to do it forever. Sometimes you do it for a season and things shift. Sometimes you do it permanently because some people do not change and you are under no obligation to keep paying for that. Distance is a choice. Use it deliberately, never apologetically. Rule 5. The most disrespected people I have known were people who were afraid to disappoint. This is the one that lives closest to my own bone, and I want to say it carefully because it requires a kind of honesty that most people are not comfortable applying to themselves. Over 44 years of running schools and 90 years of living, the people I watched get disrespected most consistently by their children, their colleagues, their communities, were people who had never learned to disappoint. People who said yes when they meant no, who showed up when they should have stayed home, who tolerated things in the name of keeping peace that should not have been tolerated, who made themselves so consistently available, so consistently accommodating, so consistently without edges, that other people gradually stopped treating them as people with limits because they had never demonstrated that limits existed. I was this person for too much of my life. My staff knew I would stay late. My family knew I would manage the hard things. My community knew I would show up even when it cost me. And I told myself that this was service, which it partly was. What it also was, and I did not see this until much later, was an absence of self that some people will always, without malice, fill with their own convenience. The woman who will disappoint you if you ask for too much is treated differently than the woman who never will. This is not a pleasant truth. It is just a true one. And learning to disappoint people selectively, appropriately, without guilt and without extensive explanation is one of the most dignity-preserving things a person can do for themselves, especially after 60. When the time for unlimited accommodation is genuinely past. Rule 6, and this is the one I want to leave you with because it is the one that changed everything for me, is this. Dignity is not something other people give you. It is something you practice alone in how you speak about yourself and treat yourself when nobody is watching. The disrespect that hurt me most over 90 years was not Gerald Patterson's wave of the hand in that 1983 meeting. It was not Harlan Briggs of the school board. It was the disrespect I directed at myself in the privacy of my own mind, in the story I told about what I deserved and what I didn't, in the moments when I accepted treatment that I would never have tolerated on behalf of someone else because I had not yet made a full commitment to my own worth. You cannot demand respect from the outside world at a level that exceeds the respect you are giving yourself on the inside. This is not inspirational language. It is a structural observation. When you speak poorly about yourself, other people hear it. When you accept less than you deserve without comment, people notice. When you apologize for taking up space that you have every right to occupy, you are giving instructions about how you expect to be treated. The work of dealing with disrespect after 60 is not primarily work done in the room, in the moment, with the person who disrespected you. It is work done in the quiet, in the daily practice of treating yourself with the same precision and seriousness that you bring to everything else you care about. And then, when the moment comes, because the moment always comes, you will know what to say, and you will say it calmly, and you will not need their response to confirm whether you were right. I want to stop here and be direct with you for a moment. You have been watching this and applying these 6 rules to someone in your life. your daughter-in-law who speaks over you at dinner, your doctor who addresses your adult child instead of you, your colleague who takes credit, your old friend who has been subtly dismissing you for years in ways you've never quite named out loud. You have been very precise about identifying how these rules apply to them. Now I want to ask you about you. Where are you currently accepting treatment that you would not accept on behalf of someone you love? Where are you staying in a room or answering a phone call or showing up for a person out of a habit of accommodation that you have never examined to see if it still makes sense? Where are you explaining yourself to someone who has already decided what they think and continuing to explain and continuing because you have not yet accepted that the explanation is not going to work? That person is not a stranger you read about. That situation is not someone else's life. You know exactly which relationship I am describing. You knew it 3 minutes into watching this. Right now, somewhere in your life, someone is being less than they should be toward you, and you are managing it in one of the ways I described: silence, explosion, explanation, or relentless accommodation, and none of those ways is working. You have a different option. You have 6 of them, actually, and they're available today. I'll tell you plainly, I am 90 years old, and I have made my peace with the arithmetic of things. I am not going to live forever, and I am not interested in performing surprise about that. What I am interested in is the years you have left, and whether you are going to spend them in the full dignity that is available to you, or whether you are going to keep donating your peace to people who have not earned it and will not miss it when it is gone. Your parents, if they are still here, may be managing exactly this: being spoken over by doctors, being made decisions for without being consulted, being treated as though the decades of their life have made them less rather than more. They may not have the words for what is happening to them. They may not have the framework, but they feel it. Every day they feel it. And you are not as far from that as you think. The habits of response you build now in your 60s, in your 70s, are the habits you will have when you are 90 and need them most. Build them now. Practice them now. With the people who are practicing them on you right now. The time for unlimited patience with disrespect is over. It was probably over before you thought it was. Start practicing the alternative. So here is what I want you to do. Today, not eventually. Think of one person in your life who regularly disrespects you in a way you have been absorbing rather than addressing. One person. And I want you to decide, not act yet, just decide which of the 6 rules applies most directly to that situation. Write it down if that helps. Just name it honestly. Then, the next time that person does the thing they do, I want you to respond. Not with everything you've been holding, with one sentence. Calm, clear, true. One sentence and then move on. And this week, do one thing that is purely an act of self-respect. Something you do for yourself because you have decided you are worth the doing of it. Not for anyone else. Not to prove anything to anyone. Just because you are 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 and you have earned the full practice of treating yourself accordingly. I spent 44 years running schools. And the most important thing I ever learned about authority, about real authority, not the kind that comes from a title, is this: respect begins with the decision, made quietly and completely, that you will no longer negotiate your own worth.